In Chapter 1, An Unwanted Journey, Ruby Vaughn wakes hungover in Exeter, 1922, after one of her infamous parties, which caused their housekeeper to quit, again. She lives with her elderly employer, Mr. Owen, in a shared routine of eccentricity and comfort. But her morning peace is disrupted when Mr. Owen asks her to deliver a box of mysterious books to Lothlell Green, a remote village in Cornwall. Ruby is reluctant. The town is tied to painful memories of a lost love. Though Mr. Owen refuses to explain what's inside the trunk, he insists the books are ancient and dangerous and forbids her to open it. Despite past troubles, including a stint in prison for smuggling banned books, Ruby agrees. She's driven by curiosity and a restlessness she can't shake. With warnings of Cornwall's strange folklore and secrets, Mr. Owen sends her off, hoping the trip will bring clarity and healing. In Chapter 2, The Growing Storm, Ruby drives from Exeter to Lothlell Green, her mood darkening with each mile as memories of her estranged friend Tamsin Chenoweth resurface. Though she's meant to deliver books to Mr. Kieval, Ruby instead detours to Pemryth Hall, Tamsin's estate. She hasn't seen Tamsin since her wedding to a wealthy war hero, and Ruby never responded to her cryptic letter pleading for help. At Penrith, Ruby finds Tamsin in a field with her toddler son, looking radiant but wearing a visible bruise she blames on sleep. Tamsin invites Ruby to dinner and hints that something is wrong, especially with her husband Edward. Ruby agrees to stay despite her unease. Her instincts tell her something is amiss, and she deeply regrets not answering Tamsin's call for help sooner. The encounter sets the stage for a reunion haunted by unspoken truths, buried pain, and a deepening sense of foreboding. In Chapter 3, The Peller, Ruby leaves Pemryth Hall shaken by her concern for Tamsin and seeks solace at the sea near Tintagel. She swims out to a rock and falls asleep, only to be awoken by a stranger warning her of the tide. The man, with mismatched green-gray eyes and an odd familiarity, helps her back to shore. During their return, he tells a local legend about a mermaid and a man who chose healing powers over wealth, revealing this man became a Peller. He then introduces himself as Ruin Kieval. Ruby is stunned. He's the very person she was meant to deliver books to for Mr. Owen. Expecting someone older and more scholarly, she's caught off guard by his presence and demeanor. Their unexpected meeting, wrapped in folklore and mystery, hints at deeper connections and marks a turning point in Ruby's journey into the strange, secretive world surrounding Lothlell Green. In Chapter 4, A Dreadful Dinner, Ruby delivers the books and Mr. Kieval to his cottage before heading to Pemryth Hall, burdened by growing concern for Tamsin. After a cold welcome from the housekeeper and memories stirred by the estate, Ruby dresses for dinner, where she's met by a dismissive and condescending Sir Edward. Tamsin appears pale and withdrawn, with a bruise still visible. Edward's veiled insults provoke Ruby, who spars with him verbally until he suddenly grows ill and leaves the table. Alone, Ruby and Tamsin reconnect, carefully avoiding the bruises and buried pain. Despite Tamsin's attempts to remain composed, her hollow laughter and quiet desperation hint at deeper troubles. Ruby tries to revive her friend's spirit with stories of her own life, masking the truth with colorful lies. Their bond flickers in the candlelight, fragile, strained, but still alive, leaving Ruby filled with guilt for not coming sooner and dread for what may lie ahead. In Chapter 5, Bad Dreams, Ruby is overwhelmed by guilt and sorrow after witnessing the toll Edward has taken on Tamsin. Back in her room at Pemryth Hall, she numbs her emotions with gin, reflecting on how both she and Tamsin have changed since their youth. As the gloomy estate creaks around her, she dismisses thoughts of ghosts and finally falls asleep, only to be seized by a vivid nightmare. In the dream, she sees Tamsin being strangled by a serpent, which morphs into Edward, who then attacks Ruby. She fights back, stabbing him, but the terror leaves her breathless and physically shaken upon waking. Her cat, Fiachna, is agitated, hissing at a shadowy corner. Ruby notices the window open, something she's certain wasn't the case before, and sees a ghostly figure in white disappearing into the orchard. Uneasy and unsure, she locks the window and tries to sleep again, just as distant bells begin to ring. In Chapter 6, The Bells of Pemryth Hall, Ruby is jolted awake by the eerie tolling of the estate's long silent fire bell. Disoriented, she runs toward the sound and finds Mrs. Penrose frantically ringing it, a shotgun, and spilled blackberries nearby. The housekeeper cryptically informs her that Sir Edward is dead, mauled in the orchard, and hands Ruby the weapon for protection until the constable or the Peller arrives. Haunted by a vivid dream from the night before that eerily mirrored Edward's death, Ruby fears she may have played a role. They find his mangled body, entrails exposed, his face shredded beyond recognition, but still twisted in a familiar sneer. Ruby fires the gun to drive away carrion birds and tries to convince herself it was a beast that killed him. The constable arrives and begins an inspection. Then Ruin Kivel appears, no longer gentle, but fierce and wild, fixing his intense gaze directly on Ruby. In Chapter 7, the Peller returns. Ruby is shocked to find Ruin Kivel, now stern and intense, arriving at Edward's mutilated corpse. Kivel, revealed as a local Peller, a healer or conjurer, joins Constable Ennis to investigate the body. Using ritual-like gestures, baiting birds away and examining Edward's wounds, Kivel confirms something strange has happened. Mrs. Penrose insists it's the return of the curse of Pemryth Hall, which supposedly struck 30 years prior. Though Ruby rejects the idea of curses or magic, her vivid dream of Edward's death and the eerie similarities shake her. Ennis tries to explain Pellers to her, calling Kivel a kind of rural witch. When Kivel finishes his assessment and says he found nothing, both he and the constable react with dread. Ruby confronts Kivel, demanding rational explanations, but he warns her that the villagers believe deeply in the curse. Their ideological clash ends with a chilling suggestion. Perhaps the killer isn't a man at all, or a woman, Miss Vaughn. In Chapter 8, rumors abound. Ruby returns from the orchard determined to tell Tamsin about Edward's death herself. Though she knows a rational person would leave Pemryth Hall, she feels an inexplicable need to protect Tamsin. As Ruby nears the house, she overhears two maids gossiping. They mention the curse, confirm Tamsin was deeply unhappy in her marriage, and suggest she may not be mourning Edward at all. They also reference a jilted maid named Miss Smythe, rumored to have had a child by Edward, who was cast out cruelly. The conversation implies motive and scandal, adding fuel to the mysterious circumstances of Edward's death. The maids also gossip about Ruin Kivel, revealing one had caught him bathing at the lake. Ruby files all this away as potential leads while reaffirming her plan to clean up and visit Tamsin. She is now determined to uncover the truth behind Edward's death, curse or no curse. In Chapter 9, Promises Made, Ruby finds Tamsin collapsed in grief, yet eerily calm. Tamsin already knows Edward is dead. She says the tolling bells signaled the return of the Pemryth Hall curse. Edward had become obsessed with the curse before his death, and now Tamsin believes it will come for her next. Despite Ruby's insistence that curses aren't real, Tamsin is convinced of her fate and begs Ruby to protect her young son, Jory. She claims the curse previously claimed Edward's uncle and wife, and she fears Jory is next. Ruby tries to comfort her, remembering the night they survived an air raid in France and how strong Tamsin had once been. But Tamsin's terror deepens. Desperate, she makes Ruby swear on her sister's grave to keep Jory safe no matter what happens. Ruby gives her word. Though she doesn't believe in curses, she is now fully committed to uncovering the truth and protecting Tamsin's child. In Chapter 10, A Gin-Soaked Subterfuge, Ruby seeks answers from Mrs. Penrose, the housekeeper, using tea spiked with gin to loosen her tongue. As they talk, Ruby learns that Edward's death mirrors a prior brutal killing. Sir Edward's uncle and his young wife were also gutted, victims attributed to the Pemryth Hall curse. Mrs. Penrose recounts the origin of the curse, cast centuries ago by a witch on the Chenoweth bloodline. The villagers believe Ruin Kivel, the local Peller and seventh son of a seventh son, is their only hope. Ruby remains skeptical, but is rattled by the uncanny details. She presses Mrs. Penrose for truths about Edward's character, and learns he was unfaithful and widely hated, especially by a former maid, Nellie Smythe. Ruby begins to suspect a human motive for Edward's murder, but is unsettled by the possibility she might have unknowingly played a role. The line between rational explanation and dark superstition begins to blur. In Chapter 11, Unlikely Bedfellows, Ruby returns to her room only to find Ruin Kivel crawling out from under her bed, holding a glass bottle containing a yellowish liquid and a fetal pig. He accuses her of meddling in black magic, believing the object to be a charm or ill wish. Ruby denies any knowledge of it. Their confrontation intensifies when Ruin questions her presence at Pemryth and reveals there's blood in her bed. Ruby mentions her disturbing dream of being strangled by Edward, and Ruin finds real bruises on her neck, proving it wasn't just a dream. He warns her someone might have targeted her the same night Edward died. Ruin can't identify the object's exact purpose, black magic or a countercharm, but confirms its danger. He leaves abruptly, leaving Ruby shaken. Now aware she may have been attacked, Ruby begins to grasp the threat around her as more real and more personal than she imagined. In Chapter 12, An Odious Visitor, Ruby encounters Reverend Fortescue, an unsettling vicar who has come to console Tamsin with suspicious speed following Edward's murder. Ruby immediately distrusts his overly polished charm, judgmental views, and thinly veiled disdain for Ruin Kieval. Tamsin clearly fears the Reverend, signaling distress through subtle gestures. Ruby deflects his scrutiny with sarcasm, defending Kieval and deepening her alliance with the outsider. After the vicar leaves, Tamsin confesses she didn't love Edward and felt more relief than grief at his death. She admits she married him for stability after the war, but he became controlling and unfaithful, fathering children with mistresses. Ruby reveals she may have been attacked in her sleep and suspects Kieval saved her. The two women share a moment of emotional intimacy and mutual understanding. Ruby commits to staying and protecting Tamsin and Jory, strengthening their bond as secrets and danger swirl around Pemryth Hall. In Chapter 13, Ruby wakes refreshed and resolved to uncover Edward's killer. Suspecting the charm under her bed was planted by someone other than her attacker, she walks to Lothlel Green under the pretense of running errands for Mrs. Penrose, but her true aim is to question Nellie Smythe, Edward's former maid and rumored mistress. Along the way, Ruby meets Alice Martin, a local with ties to Mrs. Penrose, who warns her of strange happenings and visitors. In the village, Ruby learns that a journalist has arrived to sensationalize Edward's death and the curse. She confirms Edward's notorious reputation for fathering multiple illegitimate children. When Ruby confronts Nellie, she's met with hostility and pain, but eventually Nellie opens up, insisting she didn't kill Edward and confirming she was working at the local tavern the night he died. Their shared trauma and mutual understanding foster a brief bond as Ruby helps her tend the garden. In Chapter 14, Ruby, rattled by her meeting with Nellie, delays returning to Pemryth Hall, only to be attacked in the village by a frenzied mob who accuse her of witchcraft and causing Edward's death. Pelted with stones and nearly beaten unconscious, she's rescued by Ruin, who breaks up the crowd and carries her to his cottage. There, Ruby awakens under the care of Constable Ennis and Ruin, who reveals the extent of her injuries and shares suspicions about a mysterious woman asking after him. Ruby downplays the attack, refusing to press charges against the boy who incited it. While recovering, she inspects the contents of her trunk, grimoires and demonologies that likely triggered the mob's rage, and learns from Ruin that a key book contains a 16th century Peller's memoir in Cornish. Ruin, a seventh son of a seventh son, declares Ruby must remain under his protection at Pemryth Hall, warning her that danger still lingers. In Chapter 15, Ruby and Ruin return to Pemryth Hall, only to be confronted by the hostile Reverend Fortescue, who chastises Ruby for consorting with Ruin. After Ruin leaves, Ruby deflects the vicar's insinuations and escapes into the house. Mrs. Penrose tends to Ruby's injuries and reveals that Tamsin has been gone all day. Ruby finds Tamsin in the orchard near where Edward died. Their conversation is tense. Ruby conceals her search for answers while Tamsin expresses guilt, concern, and lingering affection. When Tamsin kisses Ruby, it triggers painful memories of their past and the betrayal Ruby still can't reconcile. Overwhelmed and disoriented, Ruby begins to suspect Tamsin may have played a role in Edward's death. Realizing she has lost her locket and unable to trust either her feelings or her surroundings, Ruby rejects Tamsin's emotional plea and flees. Convinced she can no longer stay at Pemryth Hall, she resolves to leave immediately. In Chapter 16, Ruby Vaughn leaves Pemryth Hall after being nearly killed twice and feeling betrayed by Tamsin. She drives through a storm to the Hind and Hare Inn, soaked and angry, only to be followed by Ruin Kieval, who confronts her for breaking her promise to stay on the estate. Their tense argument escalates into a deeper, more personal conversation, revealing Ruin's protective instincts and possible supernatural abilities, including hints he can hear Ruby's thoughts. He admits he suspects someone planted a deadly ill wish under her bed, possibly intending to kill her. Ruby reveals she saw a figure in white entering the orchard the night Edward died. Ruin, amused by the narrow suspect pool, suggests they work together to solve the mystery. Their connection deepens during this exchange as he tends to her injuries, and Ruby, though still guarded, begins to reconsider staying to uncover the truth. In Chapter 17, Ruby and Ruin reach a fragile truce as he brings her to a village tavern for food and recovery. Despite the villagers' wary stares, Ruin insists she eat nutrient-rich organ meat to recover from blood loss. He returns her lost locket, deepening their bond. They discuss the previous curse killings and the mysterious White Witch of Launceston, who vanished after breaking the curse 30 years ago. Ruin suggests speaking with Arthur Quick, the retired village doctor, who may recall past details. Benedict Martin joins them, revealing he encountered a mysterious woman at the crossroads seeking Ruin, dark-clad, sharp-featured, and silent, possibly linked to the White Witch. As the storm continues, talk turns to Sir Edward's unpopularity and suspicions about his death. Ruby, comforted by their company, briefly falls asleep. When she wakes, Ruin insists they return to Pemryth Hall. He needs to examine Edward's body, reigniting their investigation. In Chapter 18, Ruby and Ruin return to Pemryth Hall on foot due to washed-out roads. The house is dark except for one lit window. As they discuss the mysterious woman from the crossroads, Ruin insists she likely isn't dangerous, though Ruby remains skeptical. Locked out, Ruby uses her lockpicks to sneak them in through the servants' entrance and then into the wine cellar where Edward's body is stored. Ruin examines the body and detects no magical trace or clear cause of death. Ruby realizes Ruin can hear her thoughts, something new even to him. She's unsettled but not angry. As they examine the body together, Ruby notes the wounds are unlike any she's seen and suggests involving a surgeon from Exeter. Ruin is reluctant, explaining the town's belief in the curse. Ruby presses the need for objective answers, but Ruin deflects, clearly shaken, and ends the conversation by saying they should leave. In Chapter 19, after leaving Pemryth Hall past midnight, Ruby is reeling from the discovery that Ruin can hear her thoughts. Troubled, she questions whether Sir Edward's death could have been caused by an animal, but Ruin snaps, frustrated that everyone expects him to have answers. When Ruby asks if he's truly a witch, Ruin confesses he doesn't know what he is. He's never practiced charm work, only mixes herbs and sometimes nudges fate in matters of love using observation and suggestion. Ruby teases him about being a romantic, but notes how deeply the villagers' reverence weighs on him. As rain begins to fall and they reach a flooded bridge, returning to town becomes impossible. Ruin suggests waiting out the storm at his cottage, and Ruby agrees. Though the terrain is treacherous, she is relieved to rest, until circumstances shift again, hinting that even a temporary refuge may be out of reach. The chapter ends with tension still mounting. In Chapter 20, a frantic Benedict interrupts Ruby and Ruin at his cottage, claiming his prized cow is cursed and near death. Despite the raging storm, Ruin gathers his supplies and insists on going to help. Ruby joins him, and at the field, they find the cow convulsing and frothing, close to dying. Ruby pleads with Ruin to back away, fearing for his safety, but Benedict tells her to watch. Ruin places his hands on the cow, murmurs in an unknown language, and miraculously calms her. To Ruby's shock, the cow rises and walks away. When she confronts Ruin, he claims he gave the cow charcoal, but Ruby doubts this, knowing it would have been impossible to administer in her state. Shaken, she starts to question whether curses and pellers could be real. As they walk back in silence, Ruby realizes she's offended Ruin again, and worse, his earlier uncertainty is now unraveling her own convictions. In Chapter 21, Ruby arrives cold and soaked at the Martin home after the crisis with the poisoned cow. Ruin and Benedict leave to move the herd while she's left to warm by the fire with Alice Martin. Inside, Ruby learns that the cow likely ingested water hemlock, a poisonous root washed into pastures by the storm. Ruin warns Alice to spread the word, especially to foragers like Nellie Smythe, not to mistake deadly roots for edible ones. Over tea laced with Ruin's calming herbal mixture, Alice shares stories of Ruin's past. How he once worked in the mines from age 6 and twice saved lives during collapses, emerging unscathed. Ruby also learns that Alice's son George, once engaged to Nellie Smythe, died by suicide after the war. Exhausted, Ruby accepts Alice's offer to sleep in George's room, choosing to rest instead of returning to Ruin's cottage, still wrestling with what she's learned about him and the growing sense of unease. In Chapter 22, Ruby wakes in the Martins' home feeling more rested and at peace than she has since arriving in Pemryth. She prepares for the day, knowing she and Ruin plan to visit Dr. Quick before she returns to Exeter to bring in her own physician regarding Edward's death. After breakfast, she sees Ruin in the barn checking on the cow and then speaks with Alice Martin. learning more about her grief over her son George's suicide and connecting with her over their shared losses. On the walk back to town, Ruby presses Ruin about George, who served with him and Ennis in the war, and learns George died about 18 months ago, the same time Tamsin had written her a cryptic letter. Ruby also questions Ruin's powers, confirming his ability to occasionally hear her thoughts is rare and still uncontrolled. Ruin, unsure how his gift works, suggests continuing the investigation through conventional means. In Chapter 23, Ruby and Ruin visit Dr. Quick, the retired village physician seeking answers about the past curse killings. Despite near blindness, Dr. Quick firmly dismisses any notion of a supernatural curse, stating Sir Joseph was murdered by someone in the village, not by a creature. He recalls that the wounds were too clean, caused by a blade, and that the heart had been removed, but later found by a dog. Importantly, Sir Edward's heart was not taken, suggesting a misdirection. Dr. Quick offers his old case diary to aid Ruby's incoming doctor friend. Ruby then inquires about George Martin. Dr. Quick reveals suspicious bruising, scratches, and concealed injuries on George's body, leading him to believe George was murdered, not suicidal. He also hints George may have had a secret relationship with Tamsin. Ruby connects the deaths of Sir Joseph, Sir Edward, and George, realizing deeper secrets bind the village, and Tamsin may be at the heart of them. In Chapter 24, Ruby returns to Penrith and is met warmly by Mrs. Penrose, who reveals that Ruby's cat Fiachna mysteriously found his way back to the house. Inside, the cat behaves strangely in the library, yowling at a wall as if sensing something unseen. Tamsin soon joins Ruby and tearfully admits her past with George Martin, revealing he is Jory's true father, not Edward. Despite loving George, she married Edward for security and societal expectations. Ruby presses her for details surrounding George's death, and Tamsin confesses he had returned with wild ideas and spoke of an undisclosed discovery before dying. Ruby remains suspicious, especially of the connection between the deaths of George and Edward. Later, she confronts Ruin, confirming he suspected the truth about Jory. Ruby speculates whether George's death was the first in the sequence and whether a curse might truly be involved. Ruin appears disturbed, and they prepare to continue investigating. In Chapter 25, Ruby returns to Exeter exhausted and emotionally conflicted after leaving Penrith. She's greeted warmly by Mr. Owen, who has read about her and Ruin in the newspapers. Headlines sensationalize the Peller and the heiress era, linking Edward's death to occult rumors. Ruby, shaken by the attention, plans to bring Dr. Heinrich back to examine Edward's body. That night, she dreams of a wraith-like woman taking Jory, only to be awakened by furious banging at the door. It's Ruin, soaked, urgent, and grim. He tells her Jory and Tamsin are safe, but there's been a new attack. 2 boys, including Jago, were assaulted in the woods. One is unconscious, the other, Charles, insists they were attacked by a wraith. Ruin believes Ruby might be able to help Charles speak. She quickly readies to return with him, asking Mr. Owen to bring Dr. Heinrich later. As they journey back through the storm, Ruby braces for the rising threat in Penrith. In Chapter 26, Dr. Heinrich arrives at Ruin's cottage to examine the injured boys. He confirms Jago will survive and praises Ruin's stitching and healing salve, even requesting to buy some. Ruby interviews Charles, the second boy, who reveals the attacker was a ghost-like figure in white with a claw. Strangely, it told them to run, and Charles believes it wasn't truly after them. Jago, who tried to fight, was the one hurt. Charles fled, but returned with help, possibly saving Jago's life. Outside, a growing crowd gathers, including a mysterious woman dressed in black who has been asking after Ruin. Ruby and Ruin later discuss the boys' account in Penrith's gardens, and reaffirm their belief that the killer is human. Dr. Heinrich interrupts with the discovery. Edward Chenoweth was poisoned before being mutilated. The weapon used on him matches the one used on Jago. Ruby offers to retrieve Dr. Quick's diary to compare past and present murders. In Chapter 27, Ruby and Ruin return from Pemryth Hall, tense after Dr. Heinrich's revelation that Sir Edward was poisoned. On the road, they encountered the mysterious woman seen around the village, now clearly the one seeking Ruin. Ruby urges caution, but Ruin insists on hearing her out. The woman, eerily ageless and ominous, calls Ruin Peller, and declares she has come to warn him. She proclaims herself once like him and claims to see truth just as Ruin hears it. She warns that Ruby, whom she calls Morvoranborn, will destroy Ruin and urges him to abandon her. She ends with a cryptic directive: look to the air. After she vanishes, Ruby and Ruin piece together her identity. She may be the legendary White Witch of Launceston. Realizing Jory, the baronet's son, is in danger, they split. Ruin to find help and Ruby to race to Pemryth Hall before it's too late. In Chapter 28, Ruby rushes back to Pemryth Hall, terrified Jory is in danger. She finds Tamsin and Dr. Heinrich safe, and Jory happily playing in the kitchen. After cleaning up, she broods over the mysterious woman's warning, dismissing her as a fraud and redirecting her focus toward uncovering Edward's secrets. Constable Ennis brings armed men for protection. Ruby and Tamsin later share wine in the library, their old intimacy resurfacing, but Ruby senses a deep change in Tamsin. Both women now believe the curse is a lie and that Edward's killer is human. Their conversation leads them to ransack Edward's room in search of clues. While drunk, Ruby grows suspicious about the wine and uneasy about Tamsin's intentions, especially when Tamsin nervously offers to share something but ultimately stays silent. As the chapter ends, Ruby's mind is clouded, her instincts on alert, and something remains deeply wrong between them. In Chapter 29, Ruby wakes on the floor of Edward's room with no memory of the previous night, suspecting something stronger than wine was at play. While Tamsin sleeps, Ruby resumes searching Edward's belongings and finds a threatening blackmail note referencing a broken agreement and naming Chenoweth. Tamsin denies knowing anything about Edward's secrets beyond Jory's illegitimacy and worries that this might affect Jory's inheritance or title. Ruby suggests checking condolence letters for handwriting matches to the blackmailer. She races to the study, where Mrs. Penrose is tidying and watching over Ruby's cat, Fiachna. Learning that Owen and the doctor have joined Ruin, Ruby asks for the condolence letters, which Mrs. Penrose retrieves. Determined to find Edward's killer, Ruby enlists Mrs. Penrose's help, requesting coffee and food to prepare for a long day ahead. A new clue has finally emerged, and Ruby begins forming a plan to uncover the truth. In Chapter 30, Ruby and Mrs. Penrose spend 2 hours comparing condolence letters to the blackmail note, suspecting the killer might have also sent one. While Mrs. Penrose is skeptical, she gradually agrees when similarities appear in the vicar's handwriting. Though they doubt he's the murderer, both suspect he may be the blackmailer, especially given his suspicious behavior after Edward's death. Ruby also uncovers 2 other possible matches, an Earl and Edward's solicitor, whose writing resembles the note, suggesting a shared educational background. Despite no exact match, Ruby concludes the vicar's presence without a prayer book was telling. Meanwhile, she questions Mrs. Penrose about a mysterious bottle beneath her bed, but gets no answers. They sort the letters into piles and agree the deaths were not the result of a curse. Ruby plans to visit the Peller and asks Mrs. Penrose to inform Tamsin. With suspicions growing, Ruby pockets the blackmail evidence and sets off for answers. In Chapter 31, Ruby seeks out Ruin in the woods to share her discovery about the vicar's handwriting matching the blackmail note. Though distracted and irritable, Ruin admits the mysterious woman vanished without a trace and may not be a ghost but remains suspicious. Ruby presses him to confront the vicar only to learn he's left town until morning. Back at Ruin's cottage that evening, the two work quietly. Ruin with his grimoire, Ruby drinking to cope. Though tension lingers between them, Ruby reveals her fears and trauma from returning to Penrith and the weight of her parents' deaths. They discuss whether Reverend Fortescue is capable of murder, both agreeing he could be the blackmailer but doubting he killed Edward himself. Ruby admits returning to Penrith was a mistake. Ruin offers silent comfort and before heading to bed tells her to take his room, recognizing her vulnerability. The emotional distance between them finally narrows. In Chapter 32, Ruby wakes in Ruin Keevil's bed to find him gone and receives an unsigned note summoning her urgently to Pemryth Hall. Believing Tamsin to be in danger, Ruby goes alone. At Penrith, Tamsin denies sending the note and reveals new developments. Nellie Smythe was poisoned the night before and nearly died, prompting Ennis to recall the guards into town. Ruin identified the poisoning, saving Nellie and her unborn child. Tamsin explains Nellie had previously sought Ruin's help to end the pregnancy, which he refused, offering only preventative remedies. Guilt over Edward's abuse drives Tamsin to plan supporting Nellie and her family. Ruby raises the possibility that Tamsin killed Edward, offering to protect her. Deeply hurt, Tamsin angrily rejects the accusation and orders Ruby to leave. Shaken and ill, Ruby departs Penrith, becomes violently sick, follows a ragged child across rough terrain, reaches the moor, collapses near a dark stallion, and loses consciousness. In Chapter 33, Ruby awakens in Ruin's bed after being unconscious for 2 days, having been found disoriented on Bodmin Moor. Ruin confesses he located her after hearing her call his name in his mind. Ruby recalls only fragments, a ragged child and a stallion. Dr. Heinrich later confirms she was poisoned with water hemlock, the same toxin that killed Sir Edward. He believes Ruby and Nellie Smythe were targeted next. Ruby remembers Sir Edward eating parsnips the night he died, suggesting the poison was slipped into his food. Dr. Heinrich also reveals she and Ruin share a birth date and were born during a full moon. Reading Dr. Quick's old journal, Ruby discovers an unnamed boy was born at Pemryth Hall just days after Ruin, suggesting another potential heir. Connecting this to the vicar's blackmail and George's warning, Ruby suspects the real motive for the murder lies in hidden inheritance. Determined, she sets off for the vicarage. In Chapter 34, Ruby and Mr. Owen visit the vicarage while Reverend Fortescue is away, aiming to access the parish registry. Mr. Owen fabricates an emotional story about needing proof of his daughter's marriage for a war widow's pension, successfully manipulating the young curate, Mr. Bishop, into giving them access. Once alone in the study, Ruby picks the desk lock while Owen searches the shelves. They discover a baptism record. George Chenoweth, born November 12, 1892, to Sir Joseph and Lady Elizabeth Chenoweth. Ruby concludes this George is likely George Martin, the man who once loved Tamsin and is now a legitimate heir to the Chenoweth title and thus a threat to Edward. This revelation identifies George as a motive for Edward's murder and the vicar as the likely blackmailer. As Fortescue returns, Ruby and Owen flee through a window and the graveyard. Ruby insists they must find Ruin, convinced they are close to solving the murder. In Chapter 35, Ruby and Mr. Owen visit Nellie Smythe's cottage hoping to find Ruin, but he is gone. Inside, Ruby speaks with a frail Nellie, who hesitantly reveals that George Martin had planned to confront Tamsin the day before his death. Nellie suspects Tamsin, saying she is the only one with a motive to poison her. Nellie also confesses she resumed an affair with Sir Edward in exchange for support, and overheard Edward ranting that he would divorce Tamsin if the brat would not inherit. Ruby realizes the common link between the deaths, the poisonings, and the secrets is Tamsin. Determined to warn Ruin, she races to his cottage only to find him gone. As she prepares to leave for Pemryth Hall, Reverend Fortescue confronts her, threatens blackmail, and implies violent intent. Ruby defends herself, knocks him unconscious, and escapes. Convinced Tamsin may harm her son, Ruby runs into the storm, desperate to stop her. In Chapter 36, Ruby arrives at Pemryth Hall and finds the halls ominously silent. She slips in the kitchen and discovers Mrs. Penrose unconscious, bleeding from a head wound. Ruby checks her pulse. She's alive. Mrs. Penrose regains consciousness and warns that Tamsin has gone mad and cannot be stopped. Urging Ruby to rescue the boy, she insists Ruby leave her. Ruby grabs the revolver and races up the servants' stairway to the nursery. As she climbs, physical exhaustion threatens to overwhelm her, but she forces herself on, remembering the haunting dream of a figure leaning over the cradle. She reaches the 3rd floor and recognizes the wallpaper and setting from her vision. Hearing footsteps ahead, Ruby braces herself. Just steps away from the nursery, she steels her resolve, trusting her instincts. She reaches the door and turns the knob, praying she's not too late to stop Tamsin and save the child. In Chapter 37, Ruby enters the nursery and sees the ghost-like woman from her dreams, Alice Martin, dressed in white and singing to baby Jory. Tamsin is tied up, gagged, and barely balanced, a noose around her neck. Ruby realizes Alice is the true threat. Alice, mad with grief over her murdered son George, believes Jory is her grandson and has kidnapped him, convinced Tamsin is a danger. Ruby carefully speaks to Alice, trying to calm her and distract her from harming the child. As Alice slowly places Jory in the cradle, she suddenly draws a knife and threatens Ruby. Misidentifying her as someone trying to take Georgie away, Alice holds the blade to Ruby's throat and drags her toward the window. Ruby, helpless and unarmed, internally acknowledges her mistake in misjudging Tamsin and recognizes her own past biases. With both their lives in Alice's hands, Ruby fears the woman's grip on reality is about to break completely. In Chapter 38, Ruin interrupts Alice Martin just as she's about to harm Ruby. He calmly convinces Alice to look at Jory and recognize he isn't her grandson. Alice, overwhelmed by grief and the presence of some unseen force, drops the knife. Ruby frees Tamsin, who rushes to embrace her son. Alice confesses to killing Sir Edward in revenge for her sister Lizzie's death decades ago. She reveals Edward murdered his uncle Joseph Chenoweth to prevent his child with Lizzie from inheriting. Alice admits she's been stalking the family for weeks, trying to reclaim what she believed was hers. Though she poisoned Edward intentionally, the other deaths and near-deaths, including Nellie and Ruby's, were collateral damage. Tamsin, despite nearly dying, chooses mercy. She tells Alice to flee to America instead of facing execution. But Alice, seeking release, jumps from the nursery window. Her body lies broken below. Alice Martin is finally free. In Chapter 39, after Alice Martin steps out the nursery window, Ruin confirms her death and quietly exits, leaving Ruby with Tamsin and her son. Tamsin confesses she gave Alice the freedom she never had and reveals she's spent her life following others' dreams, her father's, George's, Ruby's, rather than her own. She wants time alone to rediscover herself and be a better mother to Jory. After parting, Ruby reflects in the garden, haunted by Alice's fall. Ruin joins her, and they share a tender, emotionally charged moment culminating in a kiss. He explains he let Alice choose her death and reveals Constable Ennis was already investigating the corrupt vicar. Ruin also admits Mrs. Penrose placed the charm under Ruby's bed for protection. Ruby urges Ruin to give Benedict tickets to America for a fresh start. As Ruin leaves, Ruby questions what story he'll tell, and he slyly responds, "That's the thing about curses." Epilogue. Ruby returns to Exeter, settling into a new routine after the events at Lothwell Green. Restless but wiser, she resumes swimming and finds comfort in her household, Mr. Owen, Mrs. Penrose, and her cat. Mr. Owen receives a letter from Ruin confirming Benedict has taken the ship to America, leaving Ruby to ponder Ruin's cryptic "Ever Yours" sign-off. Mrs. Penrose, now employed as Ruby's housekeeper, arrives promptly after their departure from the estate, eager for a fresh start. Ruby notes that both Penrose and Tamsin have chosen to change their lives, the latter taking Jory on holiday to the continent. Mr. Owen proposes a trip to Scotland, under the guise of sorting medieval manuscripts. Ruby, suspicious of his true motives, agrees reluctantly but insists on no more curses. Despite their banter, she realizes she's finally found a place where she belongs, among the eccentric, the overprotective, and the quietly loyal.